everybody. Welcome to Kirby Connects. We're back in week 40 from Kirby Church. Don Myers is in the room, Emery Sears, or E.L. Sears, and then Clayton Kerr.
Thanks for giving them away.
And we're all here, and our goal is to help you understand God's Word. Now, you made it through Leviticus, and you made it through the latter part of Exodus, and some parts of Numbers. Now we are in kind of a tough little area of Old Testament, a little challenging area of New Testament, because it's not the simple gospel stories and things that are familiar to us. We have to dig in a little deeper, and then we have the wisdom lit, which
still wise.
It is
solid.
still
Yesterday,
wise,
today, and forever.
Forevermore. That's why we put Clayton on top of that. But
Nice.
But we are in week 40, so I got a question for the guys. So inflation is increasing.
Boom.
Say, I mean, we all know it is. Gas
New hot number,
grocery
what?
store,
8.2.
everything is-
8.2% today.
Yes, something is 8.2.
CPI.
CPI. So my question is, what have you bought recently that just aggravated you because it has just been, it was here in price and then it just shot up like boom. Clayton's laughing.
Just laughing at stories I feel like you're going to be told.
My favorite thing.
Stay ready to hit the pause button on the
One
key
of my
panel
favorite things to eat are eggs. I am a big breakfast guy. Yeah. And I remember, like, just 3-4 years ago, eggs were like literally 59 cents a dozen. I remember going, these poor chickens. I'm like, they are just underpaid.
Hard.
I'm like, but I'm like, I'll eat those dozen eggs for 59 cents. We're talking great price. But I am paying like $2.50 for the cheap eggs. It got to where actually the cage-free eggs for a little while were cheaper than the Myers eggs. And I was going, what kind of world is this, man?
I don't understand.
I'm frustrated.
It's frustrating. I sense your frustration. Now, let me ask you, we had this big debate about sweet potato pie versus pumpkin pie. Yeah. Is there really that much difference in taste of an egg from a free-range egg to a Myers egg?
Man, I don't know.
Is there? No, it's
There's
just
a little.
yes or
yeah.
no.
There's a little.
It's the taste of
But it
freedom.
freaked me out when I first had to start eating those more healthy eggs because that yolk was so dark yellow. Mm-hmm. I just bought the cultures. I bought into the culture machine that just said pale yellow eggs yolks are best. And so when I got that first dark egg yolk, I went, what the world? But it is a little golden buttery. It's pretty nice. Pretty nice.
Yeah.
So I have a solution for you, though.
Tell me.
Because yesterday we got our first egg.
Oh, what a celebration moment.
So now Emery will say eggs for $1.50 an egg now.
According to
$1.50
according to the rules and statutes of the Commonwealth of
these.
Woodhaven, I'm not allowed to sell them to you. But I will give them to you.
Really?
Yeah, come over, get some eggs. They're not late yet, but they will be in the next couple weeks.
Crystal, I'm coming.
Ladies and gentlemen, pre-order your eggs now.
I'm coming, Crystal, for my
Oh,
free.
my wife is going to kill me.
Is the free eggs for everybody or just me? Everybody on the podcast gets an egg.
Emery, be one of those people.
That was Clayton
listen,
talking
use
about
the
his eggs.
Use the podcast. Listen, pre-order your eggs now for those Thanksgiving deviled eggs.
Y'all know I'm not going home
bake.
now because
we
my
know
wife
you're
is
going to
kill
bake
me.
them. How much are you charging a dozen?
Good old chicken dad. Tell us.
The laws of the city would even say we can't charge.
Well, here's what you do.
Thank the Lord for Woodhaven.
No.
It's Don's benefit.
I get free eggs.
No, you put them in a basket. Go to the corner of West and Telegraph on the Brownstown side. Sell those bad boys.
Don't make me deflect
Sell
by saying
those
this.
bad boys.
Flat Rock loves entrepreneurship.
Yes, Flat Rock
Don't make me name the
embraces it,
28
man.
people in Kirby that also have chickens that don't live in Woodhaven.
Yeah,
There'll be a discount code in the link below the podcast.
There we go.
10% off.
If you can text 12340 EGG.
That's awesome.
Man. So chicken feed, is that kind of what's got you fired up about
Up in arms?
not expensive?
No,
but
and
not
and
expensive?
so
What is
I
it,
have to
Emery?
like unlabel this. So very
You know,
reputable.
anytime Emery goes, I have to. Usually we get a sweet potato and
Yes.
kind of
So
deal.
So I have to. So my wife loves honey for or coffee, tea, stuff like that. So we were recently at a very fine establishment.
Get ready with the mute button.
And my wife got a jar of honey, and when we got to register, our order was like way more than we thought, and we're like, wow, inflation's really bad. And we got home, and the honey was $25.
How many ounces you tasted?
Like 12. You gotta understand, we are not $25 honey people.
No.
You are now.
No, we are. We are the little plastic
You
bear.
could say that, but now you are.
Now, you're in a whole other echelon, brother.
We are, and I guarantee it's a
Upper
limited
echelon.
time because that will be the last time we have $25.
Who pays more than $2 for an ounce of honey?
You know,
Emery.
Not us.
Could
Once.
it have been $2.50 and then they
golly.
I don't know.
hit it wrong?
Oh.
I don't know.
Did you ask management?
Words of the
about
wise.
this?
Ask.
You didn't ask?
Don't just pay.
Don't assume.
Yeah.
Don't assume the kindliness
assume.
of honey purveyors.
No.
Ask.
There is none. There is none. Clayton, what about you?
What about you, Moneybags?
Gosh.
So we got eggs.
I got some honey for sale.
Are we going to stay in the food genre?
We're not. We're out of the food.
Ooh.
Oh.
No. And it's bad because, I mean, you got to eat. I mean, I don't know if you got to eat $25 honey, but
You
gotta
don't.
eat.
Evidently.
You clearly don't.
Evidently,
No.
evidently his wife does.
Yeah,
you
that's
know,
like
and,
7 bags of sugar.
Golf prices.
Talk to us.
To go
Oh,
used
man.
to, it was very easy to find a round of golf for $32, $36 for 18 holes in a cart.
Good grief.
And now you are doing well to find it in the low 40s, mid 40s. It's definitely.
2 jars of honey.
You could. My
could
life will last a lot
buy-
longer.
I could buy.
So you have to decide a round of golf or 2 jars of Emery's honey.
3 weeks of honey or 18 holes.
Good.
Yeah.
Good story, Moneybags.
There we go. There we go.
Prices are climbing.
Oh my goodness.
Oh.
All right.
Pastor, what about you? You
Yeah.
can't get out of this.
I do. I get out of it
No,
all the
you
time.
do not.
Listen, when you run the show,
Pastor.
baby, you can get
Come
out
on,
of whatever you.
What is it that just gets your ire when you have to pay
I will
this
tell
much?
you what gets my eye.
Yes, come on.
Is when I go to Dick's Sporting Goods or Dunham's or any sporting goods, and all I want is a nice pair of shorts.
Yes.
And the shorts are like $10 less than an entire pant. you
It is
know?
not sold by volume.
No, it is not. Granted, my legs are little. I get that. Granted,
Like,
my
we're
legs
using
are little.
1/3 the material here.
And you're
One-third the
charging
price.
me $10
That's
less.
good.
It is like,
Yeah.
but gym shorts, just stinking gym shorts. Not even.
Not even golf shorts.
No, they're 55,
Yeah.
45,
Yeah, they
55,
are.
60 bucks, and it's
Oh, yeah.
like, are you kidding me? And so,
Goodwill, here we come.
So
Oh, yeah.
I just walk around and just go, yeah. So anyway, but
That's
I
fun.
think that has more to do with greed. than
That's
it does
fun.
inflation.
We sound like our grandparents.
Yeah. We didn't pay no $25 for a jar of honey.
I remember when eggs.
No. All right.
us to eat eggs.
Yeah. Well, let's go to Honey Pot, and he'll take us to the book of Jeremiah.
Oh my man, that is a hard transition.
No, that's an easy
There's
transition.
a lot of good.
You could go a lot of ways
There's
here.
a lot of good,
Lambs.
sweet stuff in the book of Jeremiah. How's
There,
that for a
well,
transition?
yeah. That if it were true, there are. There is not a lot of sweet stuff in the book of Jeremiah.
It is a hard.
Jeremiah
hard.
9:11. I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord.
Yeah,
It's one verse.
but it
Jeremiah
is one verse.
33.
And if you look at the verse before that, it's like y'all are in a bad place and you're not paying attention. But like God is so good that He has plans for you,
Yes.
despite your own ugliness.
Yes. That's
So
that's context.
it is, and context is super important. Hobby Lobby doesn't give you plaques with context.
But Emory does. So listen up.
You
Here
come
we
by
go.
my house, I'll give you the plaque with both verses, and you'll have an idea.
That's fun. This is
With
good.
some eggs.
Egg on the side,
Egg on
free
the side.
egg.
There we go. All right.
All right. So hey, if you just look at the first 3 verses of Jeremiah, you get just a ton of background. It is really helpful. So it says the words of Jeremiah, son of Hilkiah. Hilkiah is the guy who found the book of the law that had been lost for generations and generations and handed it to Josiah, the young king, that resulted in, at least temporarily, a huge turn of the nation back to God. That was Jeremiah's dad. It says one of the priests at Anathoth in the territory of Benjamin. Jeremiah is both a prophet and a priest. And it says the word of the Lord came to him on the 13th year of the reign of Josiah. So he's while Josiah is king, he is prophet, all the way through to Zedekiah. The important reason Zedekiah is like central to what's going on. The Babylonians had already like kind of taken over the territory, but they were doing it from afar. They had a ruler in charge. They hadn't like exiled everybody. Zedekiah is this really hothead guy that, like, although they're being ruled long distance by Babylon, he tries to attack Nebuchadnezzar and take him over, resulting in the lifetime of Jeremiah of the Babylonians coming and taking the fall of Jerusalem and them being carried away to exile. What had been prophesied for decades and decades and decades and decades by other prophets, Jeremiah is the guy to actually see it happen. They call him the 11th hour prophet because it's getting ready to strike midnight on God's judgment on Judah, and he actually sees it happen. He's also known as the weeping prophet because of Lamentations. And the reason why he's so emotional is they're right down to the wire. He sees this coming. He knows God's faithful. He knows God's true. He knows God is long-suffering, but he knows that what God says he will do, he will do. And he knows it's about ready to expire on them. But there's a couple verses that are super telling, and I think they actually have a connection to us today. As early as chapter 5, verse 30 and 31, it says, "A horrible and shocking thing has happened in the land. The prophets prophesy lies. The priests rule by their own authority, and my people love it that way." But what will happen in the end? So they have all these false prophets, and then Jeremiah is really the only true prophet that's telling them the truth. So to kind of paraphrase it, the politicians, it's a theocracy. Politicians and religious leaders are kind of the same thing. The politicians rule without a thought of what God wants and find their strength in their man-made alliances with other people instead of depending on God. And the preachers only preach feel-good messages that tell people what they want to hear, and the people love it. But eventually, the truth is going to come to pass, and what will they do then? It says, 6:14 says, "They dress the wound of my people as though it's not serious. Peace, peace, they say, but there's no peace." And it made me think. I know it's dark, but just looking at the parallel between today, we get all bent out of shape about politicians when really God is the sovereign. He's above all that. But all political decisions are made not by consulting God, but making man-made alliances. And it just seems to grow all the time, this idea. If you're looking for a pastor or a preacher to say something that's just going to make you feel good and not be truthful, there is an abundance of that. It reminded me of that verse, without using a name. It reminded me of the guy he was a pastor, super prominent, really well known, and all of a sudden he just decided, like, a loving God would not send anyone to hell, so thus equals there is no hell. Big movement, popular guy that did that. Yeah. And the thing is, like, wouldn't you want to hear that if that were true? Right. If it were true, yeah, you'd want to hear that there's no hell. The problem is it's not true. So in essence, he's saying peace, peace when there is no peace. He's saying, like the prophets there, everything is great when everything's not great. And it just reminds me of kind of a lot of things that we have going on, and the need for just knowing your Bible for yourself, relying on God first. Yeah, Pastor Mike.
The national problems that Israel had, Jeremiah was bringing it right down to an individual basis.
Yeah.
Because I hear that peace a lot of times quoted in a national context. But the reason there is no peace is because individuals, if you don't have peace in your heart, it's hard to have peace in your home. if you don't have peace in your home, it's hard to have peace in your neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have peace in your neighborhood, it's hard to have peace in a community. And I mean, it just keeps building up until it's, affects the nation and that kind of thing. You know, you were saying something earlier about summing up, Jeremiah.
Yeah. So Jeremiah, such a man, all the prophets are like this, especially Jeremiah, such a great example of faithfulness. God calls us to be faithful to what he wants us to do. I don't believe he calls us to results. The results are his. He calls us to be faithful to those things. Jeremiah, like his whole life is wrapped around warning the nation, and they're not listening to him, and they're not listening to him. And you'd be hard pressed to find anywhere in 52 chapters where it said somebody took to heart what Jeremiah said and then changed their ways. And he doesn't stop.
It all happened in one generation from Hilkiah with the finding
and with
of
Josiah,
the law. Right.
Like
And
they're in a
he finds
high
that,
place.
Right. And man, they all turned back seemingly, and in one generation.
Yeah.
Good grief.
And the fall is so huge that it's like hard to even imagine. By the time you get to the 7th chapter, last thing I want to say is this. So it's called the Temple Sermon. And so Jeremiah goes to the temple. And here's what's going on. You have people, they come into the temple and they are going through the rituals of worshiping God in kind of a ritualistic way. Outside of the temple, they're following the gods of the Canaanites. And it's two totally different things that don't match whatsoever. And he calls them on it. And they have a saying that they're saying, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord. The problem is, and I think there is, negatively, there's an insight for our culture today. They were trusting in their religion. They were resting on their national religious heritage. And they were identifying with a physical building, but not with a relationship with God. Because they go in and they do all the stuff that you do in the temple that you're supposed to do. And then they would go out, sacrifice their children to a Canaanite god, and have all these high places and all this stuff. It was purely religion in the negative sense. And not to get too heavy with it, but there's like so many ways that we can do that ourselves. We could, I'm great. I go to church sometimes. I'm great. My parents are Christians. I'm great. I'm an American. And we have this sense of the structure and the ritual of it without the relationship. And the problem with the nation here wasn't that they weren't doing the rituals right. As a matter of fact, many times, God says, stop singing. Mm-hmm. Stop. Your sacrifices mean nothing to me. Matter of fact, I'm mad at your sacrifices. Mm-hmm. So stop doing the stuff and get your heart in the right place. They had it the other way around. They had the stuff. They were showing up at the temple. It wasn't like the temple was empty. They were just going to the temple and checking their list and then going out and doing what they want. Yeah. It was all performance-based. Mm-hmm. And I just think that's a danger for all of us. All of us.
As we go into Jeremiah, what makes Jeremiah challenging for me to read, and it is not one of my popular reads in the Bible, I would tell you that much, is because there are so many different groups he speaks to. Yeah. And it's not just to Israel. I mean, it's the ungodly. It's to Egypt, and it's the different sections and the unbelieving. Yeah. And then it doesn't appear, and I've done some reading on it, some theologians think that it goes in chronological order. Others think that it's just kind of, put together, and so that makes it a little challenging for me. And then the way that I was taught theology is linear. Yeah. A, B, A1, and so on and so forth. And his theology seems to be, okay, here's God here, and here's people over here. And my theology is simply God's message to whatever group God tells me to speak to. So it's hard to kind of get a long flow or a good sense of
that. That's amazing that you picked that up, because there's a lot to that. Number one, it wasn't penned by him; it was penned by Baruch, his guy that wrote his stuff down. Yeah. And there's, I think in chapter 13 maybe, at a point, he says, hey, over the last 20 years, write down everything that you said and stuff. So Baruch goes and he starts like compiling these things. Some people call it an anthology. So it doesn't have that like almost linear narrative feel that even some of the other prophetic books have. So it does kind of jump around. It has things in common with Kings. It has in common with Isaiah that he's talking about the Judah, but then all of a sudden this nation, that nation, and then it ends, with, hey, Babylon, I'm using you now to get my people in line, but I'm coming for you.
Yeah.
He does the same thing in Isaiah as he does in Jeremiah.
So if you're reading in Jeremiah and you just go, what? A bit confused, you just need to ask kind of like a good reporter, who, what, when, where, why, and how. It's just, who's he speaking to, what's going on, what's kind of the timeline, and some of that stuff you may not find out. And honestly, it's as simple now as a Google search.
Yeah.
Bible.
Way easier than it used to be.
Yeah, Bible.org, gotquestions.com, Bible Hub, those are all good. When you just put in your question, those are all good ones.
Awesome. And I'll shut up after one positive thing because I have to have a positive thing. Very beginning, 1:5.
Well, you've been pretty negative the whole time.
I have. That's why I got to have a positive thing to end it. So in 1:5, it says, it's God talking, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you to prophet to the nations. I think it's kind of a good pro-life kind of thing. God is working behind the scenes. God doesn't start working when you're born. He starts working when he has a purpose for you.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Let's take us to the New Testament.
All right, we're going from Philippians 2:19 to Colossians 3:17 this week. And as you step into these letters written by Paul this week, the question where you start at is challenging to us to ask us, what do we care about? What matters to us? What do we value? Paul is commending Timothy and Epaphroditus in Philippians 2:21. He says, all the others care only for themselves and not for what matters to Jesus Christ. I'm like, man, that's our starting point this week, is just to look at my life, look at our lives, and say, man, am I living my life? Am I caring about what matters to Jesus Christ by what I value? And then he goes on to say, as we value things, Paul says, the value is priceless to know Christ. It's far above everything else. In Philippians 3 and verse 8, when he says, verse 7, I once thought that these things were valuable, but now I consider them worthless because of what Christ has done. Yes, everything else is worthless when compared with the infinite value of knowing Jesus Christ, my Lord. And so then we press on. Paul, he reaches out to his people, and man, what an example for all of us in the church. Somebody is looking at you in the church. When we come together on a Sunday morning and worship the Lord, there may be a stage full of worship leaders, but when you worship, I believe that you're leading the people that are around you. Like we're coming and gathering together, and it's not just leaders on a stage, but you are leading those people there next to you, and you're leading somebody. Every one of us are to be influencing, leading somebody toward Christ. And Paul is pleading with tears, it says here in Philippians 3:17. He says, live like me. What a goal. He says, don't brag about shameful things that you're involved in. Don't only think about life on this earth, but he said, follow me, live like I'm living, and he's calling them to live like he's living for Christ. What an amazing call that he has in his leadership, that we can apply to our lives and ask ourselves, if everybody lived for Christ like you live for Christ, what would our church look like? What would faith look like in our culture, in this town, in this city? Philippians 4, the Lord is coming soon. Don't worry, but pray. You don't do one or the other, be in one camp or the other. I can't live And then Philippians 4:13, just one of the most quoted verses in the New Testament. I can do all things through Christ, which strengthens me. But the verse right before it's like Emery talked about there. If you want the Hobby Lobby one verse, but if I can give you the two verses there in context, the verse before it, Paul's saying, I can live on almost nothing.
Yeah.
He says, I can live with plenty, or I can live with a little. I can live on a full stomach, or I can live on an empty stomach. I've learned to be content.
I love that he says learned.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't come natural.
It's work.
Yeah.
Because that's what we talked about last week. We've talked about work so much. And then in verse 29 of Colossians 1, he talks about work more. It's just, there's work to this. So if we think that this faith is going to be achieved or accomplished without work, it's not going to happen. But that's the context of I can do all things through Christ. So I can bear this burden. I can endure this hardship through Christ, which strengthens me. I can remain faithful even when I can't see the end. Talk to me, Clayton.
Just with what you're saying there, I love, because I think a lot of times when we talk about the Hobby Lobby version of that, it's misused to say I can achieve this goal that I want to achieve. When Paul is talking about something completely different, he's talking about achieving the goal of Christ or moving the mission of Christ forward. Those are two
so many things assume that you're starting from the right place in your heart with God.
Yeah.
See, that's that second plaque at Emery's house.
So let me go on to a couple beautiful prayers here to end with. Colossians 1, verse 9, we ask God to give you complete knowledge of his will and to give you spiritual wisdom and understanding. What a prayer to pray for your kids, for someone that you care about, for someone who Christ has placed in your life, for you to be a spiritual mentor to, for you to lead others, like I talked about just a moment ago there in Philippians. Then the way you live will always honor and please the Lord, and your lives will produce every kind of good fruit. All the while, you will grow as you learn to know God better and better. We also pray that you'll be strengthened with all of his glorious power, so that you will have all the endurance and patience that you need. May you be filled with joy, always thanking the Father. And then it goes on with verse 15 there of chapter 1 to just talk about how supreme Christ is, and just read those verses and just sit there. You can just sit there with the Lord. It's the thing that's amazed me the most through the rereading for many of us of the New Testament, but the reading together here is the authority of Christ. So Christ comes over and over speaking that he is the Son of God. It was such a difficult message for people to hear, for them to receive. And then Paul continues that and says, he's the visible image of the invisible God. He existed before anything was created. And he is putting Jesus Christ at the top. And then he actually says at the end of verse 18, so he is first in everything. He is first in everything. This is Christ. He goes on in verse 27 saying, you know what the secret is? This is the secret. Christ living in you. This is the secret. And then verse 29, that's why I work and struggle so hard, depending on Christ's mighty power that is at work within me. Christ is God's plan. God's mysterious plan, it says in verse 2 of chapter 2, is Christ himself. Christ is the plan. Execute that plan in our lives, guys. Depend on that plan. Don't try to live outside of that plan, outside of his will, his desire for us.
You know, I love the book of Ephesians and Colossians. Matter of fact, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, and Colossians are called the Prison Epistles because Paul wrote them from prison. So, like when he's talking about joy in Philippians,
he's in the prison.
when he's talking about following God's will,
absolutely.
you know,
He says, I've got everything I need.
Yeah,
And he's talking from a prison.
He's not had a nice day at
situational.
Disney World.
No.
He is under arrest, and yet he writes about joy. And then Ephesians and Colossians are called the twin epistles because they so mirror each other. And again, just to remind you, Paul does this thing where the first part or a good section in the beginning part is all doctrine. And then the last part, or from that part going forward, he says, this is how you live it out. Here's the theology. You know, here's the attitude you're to have. Here's the action you're to do. Here's the belief you're to know, and here's the behavior you're to do. And so
that's a good way to say it.
You have to mirror them. You know, here's the doctrine, here's the duty, and you've got to not mirror them. You got to marry them together, because you can have the right doctrine, but if you don't live on it, you know, your doctrine is a sounding brass and a tinkling cymbal. It doesn't do anything. It makes a lot of noise. Sounds good. You know, people look at you and go, that's a good person. But when you get to heaven, those of us who have judged people around us by this world, I think are going to be somewhat shocked when we get to heaven and we're judged by what goes on in the spirit realm that we've chosen to live ignorant of. You know, does that make sense? I'm just kind of rambling, but you got the idea. So Colossians, great book. I was a Brian in Bible college. That was my society, and that was our verse, Colossians 1:16, and in the King James it says that in all things he might have the preeminence. And everything he has the preeminence. Number one, he's not second. He is the top dog. Speaking of top dogs, here's Clayton.
Now, you got handed a good segue.
You did again very much nicer than Emery got.
All I got was getting high expectation there.
Yeah, I got overpriced honey to Jeremiah.
Oh, all right. Well, with wisdom literature, we're in Proverbs chapter 24, verses 15 to 29. And like much of Proverbs, we see a comparison between good and evil, righteous and wicked. And I want to start with verse 16. It says, though a righteous person falls 7 times, he will get up, but the wicked will stumble into ruin. And I think that's encouraging for us who follow Christ, because we see and take that with our relationship with Christ. We know that we are not perfect. We will fall, but Christ is there to pick us up, and we will continue on. Now, with that in mind, that all comes from being in relationship with Christ. And as we look at some of these other verses, I want us to look a little deeper with that, because I think a lot of times when we first come to Christ, we are very much relying on Christ, and we see Christ for who he is, and we see us for who we are. And then I think for a lot of us, somewhere along the way, we start to view that wrong, and we start to look a little too highly of ourselves and look down on others, when the reality is,
so true.
He says even here, the righteous person falls. So even with that, it's still not on us that we are righteous. It is through our relationship with Christ, and we still will fall. But look at how he continues this in verse 17, 18. We're going to read 17 through 20 here. It says, don't gloat when your enemy falls, and don't let your heart rejoice when he stumbles, or the Lord will see, be displeased, and turn his wrath away from him. 19, don't be agitated by evildoers, and don't envy the wicked, for the evil have no future, and the lamp of the wicked will be put out. And then lastly, 28 and 29, look at all these. All these start with don't, and it talks about how we are viewing other people. Don't testify against your neighbor without cause. Don't deceive with your lips. Don't say, I'll do to him what he did to me. I'll repay the man for what he has done. And so as we read this, man, I want us to get back to that right way of thinking, that realizing our righteousness comes through Christ alone. It is not, I've earned this because I've been a Christian for this long. I've earned this because I've been to church so many times, or I've done this many good deeds. And we get that attitude, and we begin then to look
sense of entitlement.
Yes, and we begin to look at other people who need Christ just like we need Christ, and we begin to look down on them and have evil and prideful thoughts. And I heard it said just a week or so ago, somebody was talking about this, and they said, every person we come in contact with, good, evil, enemy, friend, every person we come in contact with, God loves them just as much as he loves us. So true. And to think through looking at people in that way is I think a lot of what is talking about here. Not looking at them as lesser, not looking as people who aren't believers as they're so much worse than me, or I'm so much better than them, but realizing that Christ died and rose for all. Fortunately, we are a part of that, but since we are a part of that, that's where our righteousness comes from, and we are to share that with others, not become prideful in that. And so as we live out this week, man, I encourage us to take time looking inwardly have we become prideful, or are we viewing ourselves in the way that we need to, and viewing Christ the way we need to view him? And man, how are we viewing those around us? And ask God to give us a heart like his. Give us a heart like his to view people the way he views people, so that we can be ministry-minded, ministry-focused, continue to be humble servants of God, not prideful in that.
Yeah. That's good stuff. That's good stuff. Having that right thing. You know, I haven't watched it, but that Dahmer thing is on. But the idea crossed my mind, you know, because what he did was absolutely horrific, despicable, hideous. But Jesus loved him just as much as he loved me. Yeah. Loves him. And I know how ornery I am. He loves them as much as he loves my grandchildren, who are still in that sense of innocence.
Yeah.
And it's just like, you know,
you gotta marvel at that. Marvel at that.
Grace is amazing. That's for sure. Good stuff. Well, listen, keep reading God's word. Stay faithful to it. You're kind of in a tough little stretch with Jeremiah, but Emery will help you through. Just text your questions to him, and take some time and enjoy the wisdom literature that you're getting in Proverbs and then the book of Psalms. And it's great stuff, and Proverbs has a lot. Again, Proverbs was written for your success today in Christ Jesus. So anyway, enough of that. God bless you. We'll see you Sunday. If you haven't signed up for the men's retreat, go ahead and sign up.